Hi, everybody. Welcome to Chapter 12, World War II in Europe, 1943, 1945. So this is the second half of World War II in Europe. And like I said in the previous videos, it's a huge topic. Although I don't have a lot of time these days for it, but when I was a teenager, in my early years, I was fascinated with military history. So I read pretty extensively out of pleasure and enjoyment, out of interest about World War II and these battles and so forth. So there's a part of me I have to really tamp down, which want to kind of grind into military history and talking about tanks and planes. But I'm going to resist that because most of you, and by the way, and even now as I'm older, that is not the most important point. Obviously there's a certain fascination. I still have some of that. If you look around my office, you guys probably can't see it too well, but let me show you an example. It is full of World War II aircraft. This happens to be a Beaufighter. That's his torpedo right there, and its rockets. Those are invasion stripes, by the way, right there. And my office is full of that stuff. Other things too. But I do have a long-term love with World War II aviation and technology. And any case, you guys, if you're interested in that, that's great. And you and I can sit down and spend a long time talking. But that's not the focus of our class. And we're on to more important things, frankly, as you guys know. So I still have had to pick and choose when we talk about the second half of World War II. It's such a massive and important topic. You guys have some very good reads in your textbook, as you guys know. I'd take a quick break there to review the reading I assigned to you guys. And I tried to assign you guys a wide range of readings about World War II to try to give you guys just a small taste of the massive scope of the war and its impact on millions and millions and millions of individuals. And that's why I gave you guys Winston Churchill, the Battle of Britain speech, which would have been really good to get last week. Go with that lecture. But the indoctrination of the German soldier, or the Volk, the fear in the fatherland, that's a really good piece to the idea of how the German soldiers viewed their war, especially in the East, which we'll get to here in a minute. And then the fighting there in Stalingrad by the German soldier. By the way, I assign it, but I recommend it to you guys. The next reading is by the reverse, a Soviet veteran. So, again, you don't have to do that one. You guys are fine. By Anton Dragon, the Soviet veteran he calls, because that's also give you the idea of how the Russians view the same fighting there in Stalingrad. Then you guys are also reading Hans and Sophie Scholl, The White Rose. This is German and moral resistance to Hitler, which is, we'll get to that in a later video, not in this one. And then Margaret Fryer, They Fainted and Burned Like Cinders, talking about the terrible late war in Germany, in this case, terrible firebombing. And then I did not include some of the readings, but right after that, you also talk about when the Red Army arrives in Eastern Germany and the mass rapes and brutality and the last depths of the Nazi Party and the SS and the ruins of Berlin. So there's more readings. I didn't assign them all to you guys because I knew you guys have the classes. Other things, but I would recommend it to you guys, especially if you guys are history majors. I know some of you guys are, to read beyond what I've assigned, because other readings are very powerful and give you guys a further window into this terrible climactic confrontation, which is World War II. So with that, grab your beverage of choice. You guys know the drill, and your pen or pencil, whatever's handy for you guys, and let's take a look here. So the images you guys in front of you it's one of the great battles of the war that is not so well known in the U.S. unless you are a military buff of World War II. But no doubt every Russian knows, and that is the Battle of Kursk, which takes place in the summer of 1943. Now, as you guys know, even more famous is the battle we talked about last week, and you guys actually read an excerpt from this week, the Battle of Stalingrad. Stalingrad is by far the most important. I don't say it's the most important. But it could be. It could be. But Stalingrad obviously is the most famous single battle of World War II in the East, because the drama in that, the test of wills in that battle, the drama, the outcome, the horrific nature of that combat, the sheer numbers involved. But there were other very important battles, and even though Germany lost Stalingrad, they were not done. In fact, they would still, and that's what we're talking about here, launch one more last major offensive in the summer of 43. That is the Battle of Kursk, and that's what we're going to talk about Kursk here briefly. But that's just an artistic image depiction of that climactic battle there in central Russia, and then on the right there, see Russian tanks, infantry surging forward on the counterattack. So you wonder, where is Kursk? Kursk is, well, you can see Stalingrad back here. The Russians, following the victory of Stalingrad, have pushed the German front lines back quite a bit, as you see depicted here, because that's Stalingrad right there. And so the German lines have been pushed back considerably, but they're still in Russia. And there was a salient or a bulge, I guess you could describe right here in the Russian lines right here. And the Germans decided they were going to attack the north and the southern portion of the bulge and cut the thing off and encircle all the Russian soldiers in that bulge. That is going to be the epic showdown in Kursk, which is more than a month long, very intense fighting. Now, the photograph on the right has nothing to do, in a sense, with the fighting there at Kursk. It just shows you, and I put that there to signify just the brutal nature of World War II in Eastern Europe. So these are allegedly Soviet partisans who have been captured, or guerrilla fighters, that captured German forces and executed, that being January 43. I don't say, just from the context of that photograph, perhaps they were Russian partisans, perhaps they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the fighting there, the reprisals on both sides on the Eastern Front is to many degrees, frankly, more savage than takes place in Western Europe. Not that there's an isolated instance in extreme barbarity in Western Europe, there are some. But I would say the sheer scale is nothing compared to the East. That's because, as you guys know, although Hitler did view the French and the Belgians and the English as inferior to Germans, but he did consider them to be close to a par with Germany, at least for the time being. I say at least for the time being. And so he did not have an extraordinary racist animus, and frankly, a plan to liquidate them that he would have toward the Slavic peoples in the East. And so the German army's treatment of the Slavs, as you guys know, was often barbaric. They disregarded them, viewing them as close to being subhuman. You guys will read that in the piece by German soldiers, the Volk, where that's certainly the language being used there. Their Jewishism, the communism, and they look like a human being, but they're not really a human being. They're a kind of beast, apparition that looks like a human being, and there's a savage racism that has immediate context. But I want to make a brief statement here. That's why I think we have to be careful inside the United States, as we tend to navel gaze on our own historical experience, which is natural because that's where we live. But sometimes when we think of race and racism, we tend to view that, unless you're really thinking about it, through that microcosm of solely the American experience. If we could just solve like the white-black divide or whatever, that would solve racism. By the way, absolutely, that is there's a reason why we talk about that in the United States. That is not from nowhere, as you guys know from our own nations, a great struggle with race and dehumanization that has come with that. Slavery being the most, but also treatment of the Native Americans, etc., as you guys know. So there's a lot there. Asian Americans, there's a lot there. The only reason I mention that, though, is it is a human phenomenon to otherize an enemy. And even racialize them, or however, to view them as somehow less human than we are. And so an example of that would be the German perception of the Slavic people. In the eyes of typical American, you're both German, Russian. I don't see, different cultures. I get it, but racially, in our superficial, it seems like of the same stock. Like, what does that matter? But that's certainly not how they viewed it. And it's important for us, when we're warning about racism, not to limit it to our localized color perceptions, even though that's critical for us to deal with it, especially in our context in the United States, but to be careful and to apply a universal humanity, because this, whether it's in Asia, and Asia has its own story, which that's not for our class, its own racial hierarchies and perceptions and prejudices within Asia, internally within Asia, or whether it's Eastern Europe or Africa or the Middle East, whatever, that this is tragically a plague that humanity has wrestled through nearly all recorded history of otherizing the enemy, regardless of whether in our contemporary eyes, they seem to be on the same page on the color spectrum or whatever, how you want to differentiate that. But for us always to keep in mind, this is a universal challenge, a moral challenge that is ever present, a danger to otherize and to lessen the humanity of another group. So, okay. So, all right. That map right there shows you the extent of the German conquest at the height of their conquest in 1942. That'd be probably shortly up to the time period of Stalingrad. Now, the focus of this lecture is from there on, as you guys know, really from 43 on. So this map actually already, the Germans have lost some territory here in the east, but still controlled large portions of Russia, including all of Ukraine. I have some books to recommend to you guys. If you're curious, I mentioned just this horrific conflict between Germany and Eastern Europe in general, Russia in particular, but as you guys know, Ukraine's part of that, Estonia, Poland. Oof, there's a lot there. I'd recommend that book on the left, Ostkrieg, Hitler's War of Extermination in the East by Stefan Fritz. That is a relatively new book. I believe it just came out here in the last couple of years, but it's combining the military history in the East, but also with Hitler's policy of at some point, certainly when it colonized these lands, but at some point look to eliminate, push out the inhabitants, which is all the Slavic people, which is hundreds of millions of people, and that whole. So Ostkrieg, but Ost is the East, and this land that Germany hopes to settle, and Krieg, of course, is war. So that book would be a very good overview of both sides of the conflict, of course, military history, but also hand in hand Hitler's final solution to the Eastern living problem, which of course is madness. When Titans Clash is another good book on the war in the East. Russia's War, that's Russia's perception of World War II. It'll be a good choice too. And that book on the right, Eastern Front, Letters Home from German Soldiers in the War. But of course, there's many books beyond those. That was just a very brief mention, a couple books that might be interesting if you guys want to dig deeper into this topic. Okay, back to the battle I mentioned just briefly at the start of this, the Titanic struggle of Kursk. We'll keep it short in your notes. I don't have a lot of text for you guys to write down. I just want to give you guys a sense. But the significance of this battle, let me highlight this for you. So for those of you guys as you're taking notes, to make it easier for you guys, there you go. It's the last great German offensive in the East. Now, it's a titanic struggle in raw numbers. Probably the Germans did probably a numbers context, quote, win the battle, I suppose. But here's the difference. Russia can afford to replace its men. Germany can't. So really, it's a failure of a German offensive because ultimately they do lose territory. On that is they lose irreplaceable men, machines, and will in the Titanic struggle in the blazing summer of 1943 that lasts for more, you see, 6 weeks. That scene right there depicts some heavy German tank destroyers nicknamed Elephants, lumbering towards some Soviet frontline troops with their anti-tank guns. And let me get you guys a little deeper in right here. So here we go. So it's an important turning point because just like Stalingrad, which as you guys know is a very important turning point as well in many ways. But Stalingrad did not end German attempts to still outright win the war through offensive efforts. So even though in many ways Stalingrad was a high watermark and the German front lines flowed backwards, that next summer, because remember this is just the next summer, Germany has rebuilt enough strength that they feel that they can go on the offensive again in Russia, and they do. Hoping again to pinch off this bulge around the city of Kursk and destroy all the Russian soldiers in that bulge. Fortunately for the Russians, they had some very talented spies and a very well-known, well, not well-known, we know him now, but not in that time period, obviously, clearly he's a spy. But some very successful spying by the Soviet intelligence agencies alerted them to the German specific plans of where they were going to attack. Armed with that knowledge, the Russians prepared very carefully for this attack to defeat it, and would. So that means moving the right men and machines, defensive lines, fortifications, etc., to await the German attack. The Germans throw kind of their best and brightest, their new tanks, new machines, Air Force, everything into this two-pronged attack, both in the north and the south. It does make some headway, probably in sheer numbers again. Probably, I suppose, the Germans mathematically probably appear to win the battle, but it doesn't matter because, again, Germany cannot afford replacing soldiers. Russia can. So whatever calculation we look at, that Russia is going to win this battle because they can afford this painful body blows back and forth. Germany cannot. And so Russia ultimately is going to win this battle. There's artist depiction of some heavy Soviet tanks slamming, and actually T-34 and KV. But in any case, I won't get into tank terminology. I don't want to get you guys lost there. In any case, a Russian tank slamming into German front lines, and that's just something that more and more Germans are going to see as time passes, as gradually the front and the course of the war in the East is going to shift more and more against German forces as the Russians go stronger and stronger. There's a map I was talking about. You can see the German pincers that you can see in blue there trying to pinch off that bulge in the Russian lines. By the way, this is what they planned. The German pincers never got that far. They did advance some in the north, some in the south. But I said the Russians knew where the attack was going to come. They're prepared for it. So it means minefields, anti-tank gun traps, Russian tanks on the reserve ready to exploit any defensive stop. A lot of infantry, trench networks, you name it, all laid out. And the Germans are going to blunder into this, not realizing that the Russians are prepared for us, and it's really a trap. The Russian general most responsible for that is General Zhukov, which is this gentleman right here. He is a brilliant Russian general. Very talented. Of course, the Germans had some very good generals too, but of the Russians, Zhukov undoubtedly is the most famous, the World War II generals, and he's very talented, very good. That photograph right shows some Russian forces stormed forward in the battle. If you're curious, want to go in deeper, because for the sake of time, we're not going to. But if you guys want to go in deeper, I have some books I recommend to you. The Battle of Tanks, Kursk 43 by Lloyd Clark, or Armor and Blood, The Battle of Kursk, another by Dennis Showalter, be some good ones. I mentioned I'm kind of military buff. I'm interested in the technology and the tactics, so forth. So if that is kind of you, there's a very useful series of books, I believe, not, but I'm pretty sure, produced in Great Britain by Offspray is one of them. You see Kursk 1943, that'd be an example. Southern Front would be an example of the book I'm talking about. Aces of Kirk, of course, is not just tanks, also both the Red Air Force and the Luftwaffe, or the German Air Force, are fighting savagely for control of the skies. That book, if you're into military aviation, that book might be the one for you. And you'll see planes like this one. Oh, I don't want to break it. This right here is an IL-2, which you guys can see it. Well, here we go. There we go. This is a Russian ground attack plane, heavily armored. There's some rockets there for infantry or German artillery, German tanks, whatever. So this is a famous... By the way, that's not important. That was just a stand falling off, so my plane's fine, fortunately. But this kind of plane is what Stalin's calling for more and more of, because, again, that ground attack is so critical to help them blunt the German offensive there at Kursk and all the way through the war, and ultimately defeat Nazi Germany. Okay, I got a little plane back on its stand. Okay. From Kursk, the Red Army is going to push steadily through a series of offensive farther and farther and farther to the west as it works its way toward Berlin. I will come back to the war in the East, Warsaw specifically, the Ghetto Uprising, and more of that, but I'll do that later on, actually a follow-on lecture to this one. This one, we're not going to quite get to that, but we will come back to the war in the East. And from this point, I want to move, by the way, I mentioned the Russian forces. You can see there's the Kursk salient right there, but you can see all the arrows pushing. Of course, that is the Red Army. And that ultimately, as you see, liberating Ukraine right there. So there's the Crimea Peninsula. You can see the Russian forces pushing the Germans ultimately out of Crimea, and you can see them pushing it also here in Estonia, Latvia, so forth, and on into Poland. And you can see Warsaw is right there. And we'll talk about Warsaw and the Poles and Stalin and the Germans and Hitler and all that. But that's going to be part 2 of this lecture. Today is part 1. We'll get to part 2. Okay, we're going to move on to the Western Front. The Western Front, and this is much more well known to you guys, just kind of within our own culture. So that, of course, be D-Day is the real aggressive, active start of that Western Front from 43 to 45. Although, again, I had to really pick and choose. There's much more to the story because, of course, there is fighting in North Africa, which I've not even talked about in this class. There's fighting in the Balkans. There's fighting in Greece and Yugoslavia. So World War II is called a World War for a reason. So there's whole theaters because of time, we just can't really get into. We need a whole semester to kind of break some of this down. So I'm not going to talk about the war in North Africa and Rommel and the Desert Fox and Montgomery and El Alamein and all that. And the Allies are going to invade Italy, which is kind of Churchill's vision. They do invade Italy, start with Sicily. The Allies do invade southern Italy, and they begin to work their way up the Italian peninsula, and they liberate Rome. The Italians are going to kick Mussolini out of power because plenty of Italians didn't want him. Some Italians join the Allies, other Italians with Mussolini after they rescue him, who continue to fight for the fascist cause, although not successfully, as you guys know. So, but I'm not going to go into all of that, although it's interesting and fascinating. If you guys are curious, there's many good books on those topics too. Anzio and all that there in Italy, there's a lot there. But let's pick up here with D-Day, of course, which is the Western Allies landing in Western Europe. In this case, it's France, as you guys know. That would be June 6th of 44. So as you guys know, it's one of the great moments in world history. It's a tremendous amount of organization required to do this. And again, it's a fascinating topic, and complicated one. Not complicated, but yeah, complicated. There's a lot of moving parts to that. Of course, the Germans are not caught completely unaware of this. They knew, obviously, the Allies would want to reinvade Europe and liberate Western Europe. So they worked hard to prevent this with a lot of with a great investment in various levels of fortification. Example there on the left, you see that massive German gun turret here, pointing out to sea, but to prevent an Allied seaborne invasion of that part of the coast. You can see here in the map there on the left, the Atlantic Wall. All the area you guys see there in green is to one degree or another at least partially fortified or defended by Germany. Now, some of those areas are not good for landings. In that case, you're not going to have a lot of fortifications there for obvious reason. So Germans obviously are not dumb. They spend a long time in the areas where they believe, obviously, it would be very enticing to land there. So obviously wide beaches with good access to the inland areas, ports, other areas obviously be very enticing, tempting places to land. That's where Germans put their greatest efforts to defend those. And you can see the German General Erwin Rommel, and I think he's probably here, but I'm not sure. In any case, leading his staff through the beaches there, and this will probably be in France. And these are a whole series of various obstacles the Germans have put on the beaches to try and make it difficult for the Allies to land landing craft. They put mines on these things. You can see all these stakes to the ground. Wow. And try to prevent and make it more difficult any kind of Allied landing. Of course, as you guys know, that's not going to stop the Allies. They eventually settle on Normandy. The combined American, British, Canadian, and some Free French landing there. The paratroopers there, and there's an iconic photograph of the overall Allied, well, I should say overall Western Allied military commander Dwight D. Eisenhower talking with men from the 101st Airborne or 82nd. Ooh, I think they're 82nd. In any case, the U.S. Airborne Unit getting ready to drop behind lines there on D-Day. At night, by the way, and that's a whole other story, how dangerous that would be, dropping at night with their extremely heavy packs, because as airborne infantry, as you guys know, you have to take everything with you. Ammunition, food, everything, because you're not going to get relieved or rescued for perhaps 3 or 4 days. So you need everything you need. You have to carry it with you on your body. So that means all the ammo you're going to need, all the food you can eat, etc., radios, everything. So the typical airborne paratrooper had a bag with him that probably weighed at least 100 pounds, perhaps more, because you have to have all that stuff with you. So, are you guys familiar? There's the Allied depiction, some maps there showing the Allied forces arriving there in Normandy. That very bloody, difficult day there on the beaches. The intense fighting on the beachhead, and eventually, after a lot of more hard fighting, eventually breaking out into France and going on to liberate Paris and moving on. Of course, it was a very costly day, as you guys know. That shows an American glider who it's obviously crashed. Looks like the entire crew on board, plus the soldiers, were killed when it crashed. It looked like it landed upside down there. Seen the fighting there on the beach. And a lot of technology had to be put together to try to make this possible. For example, how do you get a tank from a ship onto the beach? Well, obviously, you have special ships that actually go up onto the beach, land the tanks, and they did do that. But in the early fighting, the ship's not going to be able to do that because obviously they set on fire, probably sink. So how do you get tanks onto the beach? They realized that was critically important to do that. Eventually, they came up with this foldable canvas screen that they would push up above the tank. Tank's obviously very heavy, as you guys know. And with this canvas screen, the tank could slowly, carefully, made watertight, could work its way through the water. Now, it's kind of hard to see here, but there actually is a tank right here, the tank right here. Now, you don't see the whole tank because the whole tank is completely underwater. Now, again, it's watertight. But this is actually an open area right here, but the tank is under there. So the tank, again, you see this canvas right here? You extend that up way up here. And very slowly with this canvas swim fins, I don't know how to use arm floaties, these tanks could slowly wade by the right word, wade their way ashore. Once they get ashore, then they could drop that canvas down and start fighting. But tragically on the day of D-Day, the seas were kind of rough. The command ship, the tank transporter ship that had these tanks on board, the captain was nervous because of the heavy shell fire, made the tanks get out way too early. Had to go through several miles of some pretty good surf. Many of the tanks were swamped, did not make it because this is not a seagoing vessel, honestly. Like you see how calm it is right there in the background. Yeah, tanks can do that. If you start putting waves in there, this little canvas thing is not designed for that. That tank is very heavy. It's barely staying afloat. So many of those young men did not survive that trip in their tanks to the beach. There's more about that day, and again, I try to make this video relatively short. I didn't want to give you guys some recommendations on books that would be very good to give you guys a much fuller examination of this topic, and that would be D-Day by Stephen E. Ambrose. Ambrose is a fantastic military historian. He's done other things too, but World War II has been his specialty, and so he has a series of exceptionally good books. That would be a very good choice right there. The Longest Day by Cornelius Ryan is a classic too. Either one of his books would be fabulous. And then you guys already know Anthony Beaver. He's a fabulous World War II historian. I don't know how he has time to write all these books. And he just came out with a new one on Russia and the Civil War in Russia. So he is a busy, busy guy. I don't know whether he's single. I don't know. I'm not sure he has hobbies besides researching and writing, but that would be a very good choice there. D-Day, and then Stephen Ambrose, The Citizen Soldiers, is also very good. And that book is fascinating because that follows actually U.S. combat units from D-Day all the way to the final fighting shortly before the fall of Berlin. It follows them, again, from the beaches in Normandy all the way into Western Germany. And gives you kind of a wide range of what that was like, what it's like to be soldiers. And he's a fantastic storyteller, interviewer, thinker. It's an excellent book, Citizen Soldiers. I highly recommend that to you guys. Some more recommendations to you guys. Band of Brothers by Stephen Ambrose. Yeah, you recognize that name again. That book is also, he follows one specific unit. I'll talk about that Band of Brothers here shortly when I get to the HBO miniseries, which I'll recommend to you guys. If you've not seen it, it's a must-watch. It's outstanding. But that's the books. The book, of course, always gives you more details. One of the main figures in the book, Band of Brothers, is a man named Major Dick Winters. That book is focused just on him because he plays such an important part in that book, which is a true story. So if you're curious, want to know more about his perspective on events described by Stephen Ambrose and Band of Brothers for that larger unit, Dick Winters would be a really good examination of his story specifically. And then the guy who apparently does not sleep, is drinking coffee all day long. Anthony Beaver has a couple more. The Battle of Arnhem or Operation Market Garden would be a wonderful choice too on a risky, I'll get to a risky British designed attack to try to end the war early that ended sadly in tragedy. And then also the Battle of the Bulge. By the way, there's many, of course, books beyond those. I just mentioned a couple to you guys. If you guys are curious, I want to know more about these topics. So speaking of the Western campaign after D-Day. So eventually, with the success of D-Day, after its hard-fought combat there, the British general Montgomery would devise a bold plan to try to end the war quickly by late 44, and that would be to surprise the Germans, rapidly get around German defenses, and enter into northern Germany, and do it in a shocking, quick way that theoretically, at least, could end the war rapidly. Now, the plan, though, was high risk, and you can see the map here on the left. The plan was that you're going to have a series of airborne drops by the 82nd Airborne, 1st Airborne, and British Airborne, and Polish Airborne. And you're going to see, I don't know if you can see this map here. I'll make it a little bigger for you guys. There we go. So the Allied front lines are about right here. They're hoping to rapidly advance across these series of bridges all the way up in the city of Arnhem. Once they get across there, they can now descend into the heart of Germany. The German defenses were not prepared for that. German defenses were down here along the border between Germany and France. By the way, in some ways, it's a replay in a sense of a lightning campaign when the Germans, in 1940, when the Germans surprised the French, the British, and the Dutch by their rapid navigation through the forests of the Ardennes. So just like that, German kind of risky, but going around defenses, this is Montgomery's plan to go around German defenses. So that part you have to admire because theoretically it could have ended the war relatively quickly and perhaps a much lower loss of life. The very risky part of that, and it could turn into a disaster, is, as you guys see from this map, there's many rivers to cross. Each one of these has to go according to plan. Now, again, they drop these airborne units to capture the bridge and hold on to it until the British relief column of tanks and soldiers and infantry can come up and relieve them. And it's supposed to happen on a bang, 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 quick. So you drop the airborne soldiers, they grab the bridges, they secure the bridges, and then rapidly the German army rolls up this single road to relieve them, and then they get to Arnhem right here, and they're able to turn south into the heart of Germany. That was the plan. The problem is, if one of these bridges gets blown or something goes wrong, there's only one road. You see this red road here? There's only one main road. Attack having to use only one main road, even though the German army's tired, sounds awful, awful risky, and of course it was. And tragically, this risky gamble to end the war early by General Montgomery, the British, one of the British most important generals, is to end in failure. Because as you can guess it, all the pieces have to all work together, and in this attack, this offensive, some did not. And the Germans fought back hard. Ultimately, this plan to rapidly advance across all those bridges of rivers and get into Germany is going to fail. And now, it did not alter the outcome of the war long term, but tragically led to the necessary deaths of probably many young men when the plan was probably too risky from the get-go, because it's relying on so many factors to all go right together at the same time. Famously, you guys already know this, so I won't spend much time on this. The Battle of the Bulge, of course, takes place later that winter. Hitler is desperate. The Germans are desperate, realizing they are, of course, losing the war at this point, and they have to try something desperate to slow down the Allied momentum. And that was a last-ditch German offensive to try to separate and break apart the Allies by pushing all the way to the sea through the Ardennes forest and reverse the progress of the war in the West. It's probably fanciful for the get-go. It probably could not, even its wild, most successful outcomes could not have, I think, defeated the Allies at this point in the war. It just could not have. Now, again, maybe it could have bought Germany some more time. Perhaps they could have done that, and maybe it could have done that. But it would not change the long-term outcome. Instead, it used up a lot of German forces. Now, it was quite painful, a shock to Americans, the British who encountered this, primarily American units that are initially surprised, caught off guard, made them flat-footed. Quite a few Americans are killed and captured. The start of this battle was quite disastrous for Americans at the start of the Battle of the Bulge. But ultimately, the Americans began to fight back very effectively, and ultimately they would crush this German offensive, and so this last German offensive would end in failure, and the war would come shortly after that. There's some photographs on the left of German soldiers having this ambush an American reconnaissance unit. That is a knocked out American armored car in the background. That map shows the initial German surprise attack in the cold, overcast, wintry conditions of that December, and the Americans being caught off guard. Quite a few Americans killed and captured. But American forces would rally and move on the counterattack, as you see here in blue. That's an example of tank there that got into the besieged city of Bastogne, which had been cut off and surrounded by the Germans, but held out. The 101st Airborne that was there held out against German attacks, and ultimately American tanks and infantry arrived to relieve them and push back the Germans. There's a larger map showing the flow out of Normandy and then pushing rapidly, trying to get into what would be Germany. And we're about done with this lecture, but I want to mention a couple more things here to you briefly. Some movies to recommend to you guys. Now, some of these movies you may have heard of, maybe some of these you have seen. Hold on, let me center this a little better. That's better. Okay. But some of these you might not have. And sometimes as a professor, I take for granted these movies I'm familiar with. But you guys have not been around as long as I have. And by the way, Planet Professor has been around longer than I have too. So I'm kind of in the middle game here. But some things I recommend to you guys. Movies, for a lot of reasons, are a very powerful, visceral way to acquaint yourself with a topic. As you guys know, movies oftentimes can tell only part of the story. Oftentimes, because of artistic license, they have to tweak things a little bit and simplify things. We know that, but that doesn't make me view that negatively. Just realize that that's a limitation of the medium. You have 2 hours. It's not a 10-hour movie. So there's no way you can get into the full complexity. So that's fine. But it's a very good introduction to these topics that can spur you to dig deeping. So the movie on the left, Saving Private Ryan, which was a game changer. The movie came out. It profoundly impacted movie making, war films. No war film has been the same since that movie. The cinematography, the style was just profoundly different. I hope you guys have seen it. If you have not, I recommend it to you guys. It's not an easy movie to watch. There are some very graphic scenes because, of course, war is graphic. And so that movie does not shy away from that. So I watched that with my wife in the theater there in Turlock. The movie theater is packed. There's an older couple in front of us. I guess they're military veterans. I don't think they're World War II veterans. They would have been very old to be watching this. But I did think, based on the age of a couple in front of my wife and I, that they were likely military veterans, or could be, at least one of them. Any case, it's the only time in a movie where I have ever told someone around me to shut up. That's not me. That's not my personality. That's not me. It's just not. I've never done that in a movie theater ever, except this one time. The reason why is there were some teenagers sitting behind us. There's a scene in Saving Private Ryan where the American infantry storm the beach and a man gets his arm blown off, which is graphic. They show that, by the way. The man is in complete shock. And the man in shock picks his own arm up with his other hand, starts walking in just shock and daze up the beach, holding his severed arm. It's a very graphic scene. Of course, there's an explosion in the background, sand is flying, dead bodies around him, and he's just in complete shock. It's a very powerful, dramatic, gut-wrenching scene. Just the reality of combat, not the fantasy combat of someone gets hit and crumples over, fanciful, but the reality, just gory, bloody, horrific. And the teenagers behind us, no teenagers, but they were laughing. And there was a couple ahead of us, and I didn't know this, and I still don't know this today, but the couple ahead of me, I thought perhaps this guy's a veteran. She could be a veteran too. But based on the age, and they were older at the Korean War, I don't think they're old enough to be World War II, but I didn't know. Whatever the case may be, teenagers behind us were laughing. And I was, for the potential, and again, potential veteran in front of us, I just couldn't take it and told him to shut up or get out. Because it was, again, just that the impact of that movie, the whole theater was electric and silent watch because it's just so incredibly powerful. If you guys have not seen it, I highly recommend it to you guys. Maybe a lot of you have, I don't know, but the movie on the right, by the way, Saving Private Ryan is on D-Day. Other things as well, but it is on D-Day and the immediate aftermath. The next one there, The Longest Day, is a much older movie that came out in the 60s. If you like Hollywood classic movies and you want to see a who's who of male actors from the 60s, that movie is for you. It also gives you a pretty good idea, a much wider view of D-Day because it covers a wide range of simultaneous storylines. But it is a who's who. You're like, that guy looks familiar. That guy, again, this if you're a Hollywood buff, you guys might not recognize some of those people. But in that context, you probably have like, I don't know, 20 A-list actors all in the same movie. I can't think of any other movie I've ever seen that had that many A-listers. Although this one's close. We'll get to that here in a minute. I recommend Longest Day to you guys. Band of Brothers, also fabulous. That's an HBO series. Saving Private Ryan, by the way, you guys recognize Tom Hanks right there. That movie was so impactful, and Tom Hanks, I think, was so moved by that story. He thought, how is we don't have more high-quality, realistic cinematography or TV series of World War II? He became very interested because he was acting for the movie, and so he would help pioneer turning Stephen Ambrose's book, Band of Brothers, into an HBO miniseries. A miniseries, I think it's 11 episodes, so it's not that many of the series. But unlike typical TV miniseries, have a very large budget and put a lot of effort into making it historically accurate, dramatic, with excellent cinematography that has a feel somewhat like Saving Private Ryan. Not exactly, but somewhat. Even the kind of kinetic camera work and the extraordinary caregiving special effects, which are on a very high level for a miniseries. Band of Brothers, outstanding. It's a true story, so if you guys watch that for extra credit, all the figures you see in there are all represented by real people. At the beginning of each episode, typically they interview the survivors, who are being depicted by obviously actors in the reenactment, but it is just exceptionally good. I cannot recommend high enough Band of Brothers to you guys. The book there on the right, the movie on the right, A Bridge Too Far, is on Operation Market Garden, that very risky British gamble to seize all the bridges and advance rapidly into Nazi Germany. It's a classic too. That one also is a who's who. It's a who's who of major acting talent. You guys will recognize probably quite a few of them. That was made a little bit later than The Longest Day. Again, it's a who's who of major British and American, although mostly British, but actors, and it's excellent too. How they're making that movie to you. More recently, Fury came out with Brad Pitt. There's some parts about that are not the most accurate, but the other parts of that movie are very good too. Just a tear of what tank combat's like, the intensity of war. Recommend it to you guys. The Great Escape is based loosely, or not made loosely, but based on a true story of a mass escape of British and American airmen in World War II from a Luftwaffe prison camp. It's excellent. Recommend it to you guys. A movie that is not of quite the same level, but maybe an introduction to the topic would be The Battle of the Bulge. That movie, I have mixed feelings about as a kid. I really liked it, but it has some limitations to it. But I still recommend it to you guys as at least a kind of a depiction of the Battle of the Bulge. And then finally, Bridget McMorgan. That's a battle that took place late in the war. Again, I recommend that to you guys. There's many movies beyond this, documentaries. This is not an exhaustive list. It's a very brief list, frankly. But I just want to give you guys a little bit of flavor and some recommendations on how you guys can deepen understanding and also, frankly, enjoyment and perceptions of this terrible conflict and all its humanity and the rest. So, all right. I think we're about ready to wrap this lecture up. I just have one last topic to bring up just really briefly here. And that is, again, I don't want to just think about World War II as kind of a list of battles, because you guys know there's many factors beyond that, of course. That's why, again, I tried to give you guys a range of things in your readings, in your textbook, and obviously what you guys read in the Orwell and Churchill as well, too, politically and ideologically. I just want to mention one last topic, and then we're going to wrap up this lecture. But the United States, with our industrial capacity, plays a huge role in supplying the Allies. Great Britain, as you guys know, but Russia too, perhaps not so well known. So while it is true that Russia and the Eastern Front is going to absorb a great deal of the German military, so we have to thank Russia, frankly, for the extraordinary achievement, sacrifice, extraordinary bloodshed by the Russian army, Russian civilians to defeat Nazi Germany. And of course, they played a major role in that. That's all true, but we also do have to not qualify, but add to that and say, yes, that's all true. But a lot of that Russian effort was also profoundly aided by U.S. industrial strength. So what I mean by that, so the typical Russian truck taking fuel, ammunition, spare parts, etc., from the Russian factory to the Russian front line to the Red Army, oftentimes is an American-made truck. The tank that the Russians are using, the vast majority of the time, are Russian tanks. But some are British tanks, some American tanks. Some of the airplanes are British and American. But above all, tractors, trucks, you name it, we gave them a great deal of equipment, food, other things too in the war. The Russian war machine, the Red Army, which again, you have to admire, because there's no way you can take away from them. But also just keep in mind that a lot of that was also only possible because of massive industrial support from the United States. And that is what we know as Lend-Lease. For example, in this photograph right here, that is a Russian soldier on a tank, but that tank is American, as is this tank right here and that tank right there. So it's just an example, and here's one more example. This shows U.S. shipments to USSR during World War II. So a vital part of that war, obviously, is supply. Which side can supply each other? The United States is able to produce a great deal of all kinds of stuff, food, machines, material, etc., to ship to our allies, not just Russia, of course. Great Britain, as you guys know, received a great deal from us, other countries as well, too. But Russia and Great Britain obviously are number one, number two, clearly for the industrial might of the United States to help supply them and keep them in the fight. All right, there's much more to this topic, but that's the end of this lecture, so that'll be in the follow-on lecture. Hope all of you guys are doing well. We're getting close to the end of the semester, not too far away now, so hope you guys are well, and we'll see you with the next follow-on lecture, the very last one on fighting in World War II. Take care, everybody.